Hi everyone, welcome along to our latest Knowledge Share webinar. It's nice to see you all here. I'm introducing myself today, which is an interesting experience. Myself and Ryan from IRMS Scotland are going to chat through our approach to how we've implemented and are using Microsoft 365. So I'll hand over to Ryan in a wee second, but before I do, just to highlight that the webinar is recorded and it will be uploaded to the IRMS YouTube channel afterwards. So if you want to pass it on to anyone else or watch it again, you're able to. And if you've got any questions throughout or any comments, please do use the chat function and the questions function, which should be on the right hand side of your page. But yeah, so introducing me and Ryan. So I'll pass it over to Ryan.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming along, thanks for having us. Thank you to Maria for asking Claire and I to deliver this webinar. A little bit of background, Claire and I delivered a webinar, I think, some point last year, just about the HES journey, how we've gone from not really even knowing what records management is or having any appreciable records management function to where we are now in the middle of a deployment of IRMS in the shape of Sharepoint. So yeah, Maria asked us to go into a little bit of a deeper dive as to our journey so far. So having had a little bit of a think about it, we've thought looking at our Microsoft 365 deployment would be something that's worth discussing. I'll state right at the start, this is just how we've done it. We're not claiming we've done it the best way or even necessarily the right way, but it's a way that works for HES. So yeah, a bit of a warts and all chat through what we've been doing, broadly with a focus on SharePoint, OneDrive, and Microsoft Teams. So let's get started. So setting the scene a little bit, to go right back to the start. HES had
Ryan, before we start, let me just have a quick announcement. Oh, there we go. It's working. So sorry, Ryan. So before we start, let me just have a quick announcement. We are testing this new Livestorm functionality, and I think it is working. We now see Christine. You can now join us audio and visually as well. It's a new functionality of Livestorm. So it would be great to hear because, sometimes we really want to hear your voice as well. This is Maria, your outgoing Scotland chair. And the reason why I interrupted Ryan and Claire is because I really wanted to make sure that that we use this webinar to also, of course, welcome Ryan, who is the incoming Scotland chair. We will do our official handover on the 1st of April. But yes, please do welcome Ryan Kerr as our new Scotland chair. And I'm so proud to announce that. There's Christine and Christine. We've got two Christine on the line. So note everybody, you've got audio visual capabilities now, so we can have a chat as Ryan and Claire go through this. Of course, we have Shona as well, who is helping us out. Now, after this discussion, I am going behind the background as Ryan and Claire discusses this, but obviously now you've seen the capabilities of the platform, these new capabilities, then you know that we can have a more interactive discussion now. We can grill both Ryan and Claire. So thank you so much, Ryan. Congratulations. And I am going in the background now.
Thanks, Maria. Yeah, super excited to be taking over from Maria and all the fantastic work she's done with the Scotland group of IRMS. And I think if we've not already set up, there'll be a coffee morning or coffee afternoon being issued. So it'd be great if you could come along, and I can maybe even try and convince you to come and help us on the committee. So yeah, that's all super exciting and a little bit in the future. So quickly getting back to this presentation. yeah, just setting the scene a little bit around HES and Microsoft 365. And this little bit here was before my time a little bit, or I wasn't quite as involved, certainly. So my understanding is that HES purchased Office 365 at the time, primarily for its Outlook tool and an email solution. And it was some time after having that and implemented that there was a recognition that actually it had all this other stuff that we weren't really using it for. And that discovery of other tools as part of the platform is what we're going to focus on today. So for a long time we had SharePoint but never really used it. Likewise with Teams, when it was first launched, HES didn't have a plan or didn't have any approach for how we were going to use it. And whilst we do currently use other functionality such as Stream, that's not something we're going to talk about today. As I've already said, we make no claims to be doing this perfect. We're absolutely nowhere near being finished. I'd argue very few organisations, if any, are. However, we hope that today's webinar will spark a bit of discussion, a few thoughts on how organisations across Scotland are approaching the task of deploying Microsoft 365. By all means, point out if we're doing something that you've done and has gone horribly wrong. The sooner we know, the better. And yeah, I suppose the last point to highlight is that of these three tools that we're going to talk about or focus on, SharePoint's the only one that the information governance team has been the lead in deploying. So while we've had input in the deployment of Onedrive and likewise with Teams, SharePoint's our baby, for want of a better phrase. That's the one we've had the greatest involvement in deploying. So hopefully that sets a little bit of a scene for you. I hope you get some really useful stuff out of today. And I'll hand over to Claire, who's going to talk through the three platforms and our deployment of them in a little bit more detail.
Fab, thank you. So I'll need you to be in charge of the slides if that's okay.
Doing my best.
Yeah, so as Ryan mentioned, SharePoint is the sort of main one that information governance have been involved in. It's very much been driven by myself and Ryan and the rest of the team. We started in 2019, I think, and we're currently about 2/3 of the way through the organisation getting them moved off of the shared drives and into SharePoint. Although it's worth pointing out that the last third that we've got to go is probably the three biggest and most complex areas of the organisation. So it's certainly throwing up some challenges. You might have heard us chat before about the work that we've done with our business classification scheme and our retention schedule. So the two are very much linked. The business classification scheme is very functional based and feeds into the retention schedule. So we use that as our starting point for our structure within SharePoint. It gives us a strong functional based foundation to build on, and because it's linked to the retention schedule, even if we make changes, so we use that as a starting point, and if we end up turning what we want to be one site into 2 or 3 sites or several document libraries, because of the way that it's linked, for retention purposes, we're still able to see, well, it might not be called the same thing and it might be split into 2 or 3 areas in SharePoint, but we know that that still links through to a set number of lines within the retention schedule. So from a retention point of view, that's been really helpful. The way that we've worked the migration over, and I won't bore you with too many details here, but what we've done is we've gathered requirements. So we've worked very closely with business areas. We've got appointed super users within each team or each business area, and they're our point of contact. They're there to tell us what their business area needs from the system, what their requirements are. So we kind of gather that. Starting with that business classification scheme, we then mould that to become what will be their structure. We get that agreed, we get it built in SharePoint, but we also build a staging area in the shared drives. So using folders to mimic what the structure will be in SharePoint, and ask staff to move the documents that are within scope of the project and are coming over to the document center, as we are calling it, into these folders. So it gives them a chance to get used to the new structure in a familiar environment, rather than throwing them into not only a new system but a new structure at the same time. And it seems to have been working well. I think we've had some good feedback on that. Certainly the pilot that we did, not every area that was in the pilot used the staging area. They just went straight into SharePoint, and certainly the feedback we got from that was that the staging area is the way to go. So I think that's been really useful. What we also do is, once the files have then been migrated over into SharePoint and they go live, that's the end of the project's involvement. But that's where IT, that's the wrong team, IG, Information Governance, that's where we sort of step up and take over. And we've got a set post-go-live support system in place. So there's drop-in sessions where we run a super user refresher session, so just 15-minute demonstrations of the various different functionalities of the system. And at the end of 3 months, we sit down with the business area and do a review. So what's working, what's not working, what can we change to make your life easier? What can we do from our point of view that's going to make things slightly better for us? And it gives them an opportunity to get stuck in and actually use the system and see, well, we thought in theory that actually having this metadata column was going to work for us, but now that we've been using it for sort of 12 or so weeks, we've realised that that's actually not the way to go, and we'd like to make some changes. And I think that's been working really well as well, just having that flexibility. I guess one thing to highlight that we're not going to talk about today is the records management functionality of Microsoft 365, sort of retention labels and things, because we don't actually use that. We've got a third-party software, Records 365, from a company called Sharepoint, and it uses a rules tree in the background, so a sort of if this then that flowchart type system. And that it's another reason that we wanted to build the document center based on the business classification scheme, because our Records 365 system is built on our classification scheme, so it really helped sort of smooth that process. I probably won't talk too much about retention in general, actually, because our processes and procedures, that sort of business as usual, that's still being built and being developed. So although we've been building the retention into the system, we haven't actually we haven't done any of it. We haven't run any disposals or anything like that. So I think the next step will be to do a review at the end of the SharePoint migration and look at how we've built it, and do that sort of the review that we've been doing with the business areas almost, but with ourselves. Is it the most efficient that it can be? Is there ways that we can make it easier for us or for the user? So yeah, that's probably about all I can say about retention at the moment. But it's probably something that we can come back and talk about once the project's done. So always good to have some future topics. So what's worked well with our SharePoint implementation to date? So from the records management perspective, having that link in the structure to the BCS and the retention schedule, that makes things much easier from our point of view. From a user's perspective, I think getting them involved in the build, so having those super users and having them involved in the process right from day one all the way through to beyond the super user role doesn't end with the project. That's an ongoing role, and I think it's just helped with that buy-in, rather than them feeling like we've designed a structure and a system and imposed it upon them. We've engaged with them, we've listened to what their requirements are, and while we've had to push back on some things, I think it's definitely been a worthwhile exercise to get them involved. One of the nice things to see, actually, one of the consistent sort of bits of feedback that we've been getting at the 3-month reviews is requests for changes and for additional metadata, and for business areas have been realising that the system can work better for them and it can make them more efficient, and kind of seeing that engagement with it post go live has been really good from my point of view. That is not to say that there have not been challenges. There have been and continue to be many challenges. That's all part of the fun. I think one of the biggest ones is consistently sticking to that functional structure. there's quite a lot of what's the word, attitude, I guess, of staff and heads, that it's that sort of, that information is mine, it belongs to me, it belongs to my business area. I don't want to share it with other people. I don't want other people in my area. So trying to kind of battle that attitude and break down those silos has been quite challenging, but I think we're getting there slowly but surely. And from a records management perspective, getting users to use it properly. It doesn't matter how well we've got the records management software built behind. It doesn't matter how closely aligned it is to the BCS. If users aren't engaging, they're not saving things in the right place, they're not adding the right metadata that allows the triggers to allows the retention to be triggered, then it's not going to work. So yeah, basically the challenges have been the people. I think that's probably the easiest way of putting it. It's trying to find that balance between we do need them to work with the system and engage with it, but we don't want them to become the records managers. That's our job. So it's trying to find that balance between building it in a way that gives everyone what they need. We've also still got some information that's staying on the shared drives at the moment. So linked spreadsheets is one that are a couple of areas of the business that rely really heavily on spreadsheets that are linked through macros or just direct links, that if we move them using ShareGate that we're using, that it doesn't automatically fix those links. So to move them would be to result in an awful lot of manual work. So we need to kind of come back and have a look at how we address that. Also, technical data we've left out of scope of the project. So we're only looking at it's like Microsoft Office documents, Word, Excel, what's the word? PowerPoints, PDFs, that sort of thing, those sort of generic Office type documents. Other sort of technical information is staying on the shared drives just now, and we can kind of come back to that at a later date and work out what's the most appropriate place for that and how do we approach it. We also haven't been implementing workflows or any of the sort of more in-depth functionality of SharePoint. That's a sort of almost a second phase of the work, is to come back and look at how can we further streamline the information that we've got flowing around the organisation. Hopefully that gives you a sort of brief overview of how we've approached SharePoint and some of the challenges that we've found. And yeah, by all means, if you've got any additional questions, please fire them into the chat or the questions. The next thing that I'll chat about is OneDrive. So I don't have very much to say about OneDrive. I think it's been one of the easiest ones from our point of view. So the deployment of OneDrive was led by IT just at the tail end of 2020 and into the start of 2021. Although information governance, we were involved, but it was very much led by IT. So we've opted to use OneDrive solely as personal storage, so advocating that even drafts should be held in the document centre, kind of promoting that version control and that idea that you don't need to separate your working documents from your final versions. It's all the same thing, and it should all be kept. It's all corporate information. It's all organisational stuff. So kind of advocating that goes in the document centre. OneDrive, our guidance kind of points to being used for your sort of personal documents that you might need, line management stuff, if you've got any pictures of your dog or your family for backgrounds, that sort of thing. In terms of governance, we haven't really done much around it aside from the guidance. And Ryan will chat a wee bit more about the guidance later, but it's almost sort of use case based. So I want to do this, which one do I use? The only thing sort of governance related we've put on OneDrive is a storage cap of 2 GB per person. So my understanding is that Microsoft 365 gives you a terabyte per person for OneDrive storage, which, given what we are proposing that it be used for, in my opinion, is excessive, I think. Is probably a good word for it. So yeah, we've put a storage cap of 2 GB on just to try and encourage people to use it in the right way and not use it for everything and anything. I think the main point with the OneDrive stuff is ultimately you can't stop people using it how they're going to use it, but what you can do is provide that sort of guidance and light touch governance to try and promote that they use the right tools in the right way. So yeah, OneDrive's nice and easy, not too much to say about that. So the third and final one that I'm going to chat about today is Teams, which, yeah, it could probably be a webinar series in its own right. But somewhere around about 2018, 2019, individuals across the organisation and individual business teams would come to IT and ask to start using Microsoft Teams. And IT approached us for guidance on what do we allow, what governance is in place. And I remember thinking at the time, what is Microsoft Teams? I think it was new. I certainly obviously can't speak for the rest of the team, but I had no knowledge of it whatsoever. We were knee deep in getting Sharepoint off the ground and just didn't have the resource to be able to investigate and to roll out Teams in an educated or in-depth fashion. So I think it's fair to say that we took a pretty blunt approach to it. We introduced a process for getting teams, so any request for a team site would have to come through information governance. You can't just kind of go off and create your own team site. So we've got a bit of oversight there. Each team site has a named site owner. So we've got that sort of ownership. We introduced some guidelines on what it should be used for. So the way we've approached it is sort of short-term collaboration or shorter-term projects, communication networks. We've applied using Records 365, so not using the Microsoft 365 stuff. We've applied a 2-year retention to the information, so not to the team site itself, but to any files held within team sites. 2 years after it's last modified, it automatically gets deleted. So it's that sort of light touch promoting the way we want it to be used, in the same way that we've got the storage cap with OneDrive. It's not perfect. It's, as I understand it, against the way that Microsoft would recommend that you use Teams, but it does allow us that level of governance and gives us reassurance that it's not growing arms and legs while we finish SharePoint, so that when eventually we get the time and resource to come back to it, there is that sort of rough control over it. Yeah, I think Microsoft advice, and Ryan can maybe chat a little bit more about this later, but I think the Microsoft advice was just to kind of open it up, then look at how staff are using it, and then apply governance from there. But yeah, we decided in conjunction with IT that wasn't the way for us at the moment. We've also given each directorate a team site, and that's for communication between their staff, and they can have the different channels for the different teams and the directorates, and that sort of team-based work. And personally, I think that's where teams can really shine. But I think that approach is almost it almost rebuilds those silos that we're trying to break down. If the Microsoft approach to Teams is that you can do everything within your team site, but if your Teams site is based on your business team, then you're just building those walls again that we're trying really hard to break down with the document center. So from my point of view, that sort of team stuff is where teams can shine, but it does come with challenges. The sort of light touch approach we've taken, so yeah, we don't really say no to any request for a team site. If someone wants one, we're happy to give it to them, providing there's a named site owner. We add it to our central register so that we know it exists, and we give them sort of general advice. So if you've got information held within Teams, don't also store it in the document center, or vice versa. If it's in the document center, add links to it in Teams. Don't store it in 2 places. And that's pretty much all that we do for Teams at the moment. I think it's the benefit is that we don't have to do very much. We just need to ensure that governance is being communicated at creation, and it lets us be flexible. I think Teams, the way it's been used and promoted by Microsoft, is gonna, the rate of change in Teams is not going to slow down. I think they've recently added approvals, and that wasn't there 2 weeks ago. So it it is constantly changing. So I think having that light touch approach, it allows us to have that flexibility that I think is really important when you're dealing with technology that changes as quickly as Microsoft does. Some of the challenges, staff always want to use it for longer than the 2 years that we've got on it, and it's trying to communicate why we've put that in place and what alternatives they have that they can use. We also don't know if site owners are acting on our advice, so it's all very well us giving them all this information when they create a site, but we don't then know if that information is being sort of filtered down to the people that are using the team site. We've got no way of knowing what information is being held in Teams, or whether people are using it the way it's intended to be used. And I think that's probably fair to say with all of the tools, with the exception perhaps of SharePoint and the Document Centre. But I think the biggest challenge is that Teams is being promoted by Microsoft as the product. I mean, I saw an advert for it on television the other day. Like, it's not something I think I've ever seen for SharePoint. So yeah, it's very much being pushed by Microsoft, and that it makes it hard when you've got your staff out there hearing all these wonderful things about Teams, and then coming to get it from us, and we're kind of saying that there are rules and structure around how it can be used. So that can be a bit challenging. There's also a slight bit of confusion at the moment, I think, or potential for confusion, is probably a better way of putting it, in that our telephony and meetings is still done through Skype. So we are currently changing to Teams, but it basically means that we've got Teams and it's available, but you can't use the chat function and you can't use the meetings function because that's all done through Skype. So I think that has the potential to cause a bit more confusion with staff that don't necessarily know what Teams is or how it works with things like Skype. So yeah, Teams it's an interesting one, and I think there's definitely a lot more work there to be done. But as I said, by putting that sort of light touch around it, it lets us focus on other things and get the Document Centre finished, and then come back to it knowing that it can only have grown so many arms and legs since we last looked at it. It's not quite gotten out of control, which is quite reassuring, I think. But yeah, I will, unless, in fact, I haven't looked at the chat. Are there any questions or anything around?
There's been a few really good questions, but I've suggested we leave them to the end.
Yeah,
we should
sure.
have plenty of time, and
Cool, let's do that then.
I think it'll be easy to or give them each a good amount of attention.
I'll pass back to you then.
Cool, thank you very much. I'm going to try and get my OneNote up and not show everybody else at the same time. So hopefully that you can still see our slides rather than my notes.
We can, yes.
Perfect. So yeah, I think Claire's, I hope you found that all very useful, being able to go into each tool and how we've approached, or what our approach has been with each one in a little bit of detail. But I thought it'd be useful to sort of take a slight step back and see if there's any cross-platform thoughts, anything that Hess has discovered as it's been deploying the tool that applies to everything that we're doing, I suppose. And the first thing that sort of struck me was, and it starts with guidance, but it goes into a slightly different topic. But we've looked to create obviously very specific guidance around the Document Centre, ensuring people know how to use that and all its different techniques, and that maybe our why we've designed it like we have. But it was requested pretty quickly and understandably for if we were putting these rules in place around how you should use one platform versus another, so using OneDrive for personal stuff and line management stuff, for example, that there was some wider guidance on that as well. So we've produced some, and it's gone down very well with the business areas, particularly the business areas that have been calling for it, understandably. But it's also quite an interesting indicator to some of the slightly wider issues or wider challenges potentially. So yes, while some business areas are delighted, they love it, it gives them some direction, there's other areas probably coalescing within our internal comms department that are really worried that we're overloading staff the Document Centre project isn't the only large corporate project that's going on at the moment that involves technology. We're changing our HR and finance system as well. So staff are, I think it's not just comms making this up, there is clearly staff out there that are feeling overloaded. Obviously we're in lockdown or variations of lockdown over the last 12 months as well. So yeah, I think there's a very real concern that it's too much, that people are unable to cope with everything that's going on, and more guidance seems to be the coalescing point, which I find slightly strange, but nonetheless, pushing too much guidance out there is just going to confuse people. So whilst I think both schools of thought are right, that yes, it's good to have the guidance out there and people can use it as and when they see fit, but I can understand the pressures. From an information governance point of view, we don't really have a choice. The technology is there, it's being used. We need to provide guidance, otherwise it's going to be used in a way that we don't really want it to. To go into just a little bit more detail to what Claire touched on Microsoft's advice, I can't specifically remember the purpose of this meeting. I think it might have been how we should roll out Microsoft Teams from Microsoft's perspective. And it was a Teams call, and I remember thinking, this is the Wild West. They just want us to take the take the stabilizers off and just let the organization go to town with Teams. And I was delighted to see my IT colleagues push back before I even needed to, say that's just not a very sensible approach for HES at all. And it's slightly disconcerting, and it probably comes back to and apologies, Maria, I'm going to get the term wrong, but the customer advisory board, or the IRMS, are engaging with Microsoft from records, excuse me, records management perspective, is that the technology is, from Microsoft's perspective, being designed as a great tool for collaboration and just let the users go and find the best way it works for them. But from an information management perspective, that's not always going to be ideal. In fact, oftentimes it will be the opposite of ideal. But yeah, so broadly around guidance, obviously it's really important. There's needs to be a bit of an awareness that that it's not a one size fits all. And I think that's one thing. We can write the best guidance and do the best training in the world. There's always going to be that risk that member staff wants to keep everything under OneDrive, or hates the Document Centre and is going to focus on and just use Teams. And it's trying to get that balance, I suppose, and do your best, or do our best. Again, putting myself in HES staff shoes, in some ways you can argue they've gone from having a one approach. So it was shared drives, and they had their personal drive, and there was various different bits of the shared drives, but nonetheless it was one technology. They, in some cases, had been using it for a long time, and even if they hadn't, their colleagues would have. So it was very well known and understood. Might have been a mess from an information management perspective, but nonetheless, people knew how to use it. They're now being asked to look at 3 different locations. So do I save it in OneDrive, Teams, Document Centre? At the same time, I've got our CMS projects, or HR and finance stuff can go somewhere else. And you've got your own bespoke systems that each department will be using to a greater or lesser degree. So there's very real potential for confusion, and it's also worth remembering, and this is particularly applicable to certain elements of HES, is that everyone has different levels of IT understanding and what they're able to cope with, and it's important not to just assume that everyone's as capable as we are in IG, sorry, or certainly not as capable as our IT colleagues. And I think people will always try and find that path of least resistance. So what will work for them might not work for somebody else. And Teams, in HES's experience, is a really good example of that. There's certain business areas that absolutely love it. They've been using it in ways that we've maybe envisaged it, ways that we haven't, for better or worse. And yeah, it's heavily used by certain groups of people. Meanwhile, I would suggest the vast majority fall into this bracket to a greater or lesser degree. there's a whole lot of people that barely know it exists or find it almost a nuisance. From my personal experience, I'm a member of, I don't know, about a dozen teams, and you can count on one hand the number of times that I'll go into the team site for any real or practical purpose. It barely influences my working life, if I'm honest. Maybe it should, but the point I'm trying to make is that different departments, different people are going to use the technology different ways, almost regardless of what governance or structure we put in place. And I think that brings us nicely onto trying to find a balance. 2 seconds. Yeah, a balance for people in their day-to-day lives that allows them to manage their information in a way that allows them to do their job at the same time as managing their information in a way that allows us to comply with, whether it's Public Records Scotland Act, Data Protection FY, whatever the legislative reasons, or just our desire to see an effective and efficient, a smooth management and use of our information in a way that we believe, given our profession, we believe is the best for the business and allows for, whether it's efficiencies or making the most of the information that our organisations have. I think something else that may have come through as we've been talking is this idea around working to exceptions. We've found that pretty much no matter what perfect, absolutely, you wouldn't want to do it any other way approach, regardless of how good our approach is, there's always going to be exceptions. Many of them very, very valid that we've not considered something quite right. But I'd say probably the majority, it's where a business area just does not want to shift their view or their process at all. They're not prepared to accept it. And it might be that they're prepared to accept it in every other part of their business, but not this one process or this one function. So generally, we've found over the last year or so that it's about picking our battles, accepting that there's going to be exceptions, and we might not like them on a few occasions. So to give you one example specifically, I won't tell the business area, but ultimately they collate papers, they get comments back and forth on papers, and then put them out for meetings or board meetings in this case. And they found the first time trying to collate papers for a big meeting, it took them, well, they claimed 9 hours when it previously took them about an hour. I think that there might have been other things going on there as well, but nonetheless, the system had made their lives harder from their perspective. And obviously that's not what we wanted. It's not the goal by any stretch. When we spoke to them, it was pretty clear that they hadn't quite got their head around the processes and how to use the system. I mean, fundamentally, Microsoft would have heard their use case and gone, yes, we have the perfect technology for that. And it would probably have been Sharepoint. But from their perspective, it wasn't working for them. And they were digging their heels in to such a point that Claire and I were speaking to them, pushed back a little bit, but it became apparent very quickly that if we kept on pushing back, they were just going to shut down completely. They weren't going to use the system at all. They were going to revert back to what they'd previously used, and it would just be more bother for everyone down the line. So we've had to make an exception there. Counterpoint to that would be that there's multiple teams have come to us and asked for more of our functional based approach. They've used it a little bit and begun to make contact with other teams in the business where they've got shared work and realized actually there's an even better way we can do this. We don't need it in these two functional areas. We can have it just in one, and both use the one area. So yeah, it's really encouraging to see a lot of teams, to be honest, engaging with us and understanding where we're coming from, willing to take a bit of a bit of a leap and try what we're suggesting, and finding actually, yeah, this makes a lot of sense and this works. This can work for us. It's maybe a bit different, but it can absolutely work. The next thing would be, so I did my dissertation recently on Microsoft 365 for PRSA compliance, and one of the takeaways I had from it is that the platform's enormous and it's hugely complex. And I can't speak for everyone else on the call, but I'm not an IT expert, and I don't intend to be. I'm not even a Microsoft expert or a Microsoft 365 expert. And what we're trying to do is manage information within that world as best we can. And in my opinion, there's only so much we can do at any given time. So yes, don't get me wrong, it's clearly, and listened to Renee last week, I think, we do need to know more about our technology than perhaps previous information management professionals may have. But that's not the same as saying we need to be IT professionals. So it's I think trying to focus on what is going to give us the best bang for our buck, I guess. And for HES and for information governance within HES, we feel the document center is that priority at the moment. And we've tried to resist spreading ourselves overly thin or too thin. If we were being critical, you could perhaps look at our approach to Teams and view it as no more than a band-aid. And it's got the potential to go wrong in various different ways. But from our perspective, it's just enough governance to keep some level of order and control. And then, as Claire touched on, when we finish up with the Document Center project, we can start to realign resources, maybe pay teams a little bit more attention as to what we could do with it. I think it's also important to remember that resource requirements aren't an insignificant issue. And it's not just IG. I don't imagine there's many enormous information governance or records management departments on this call, or people that are part of enormous departments. But it's not even about that. You need to line up your IT department, your comms department, the business area that you're actively looking to help or work with, and aligning all that when most of those departments will have varying priorities is a challenge in itself. So I guess what I'm getting at is that with it being so complex and with it being so many different things you need to consider, it could be very, very quickly or very easy to fall into trying to do everything and ended up doing nothing kind of approach. Just following up on that, I know Teams in itself is hugely complex, and we're not really focusing on retention very much, but you need to apply different retention tools to different parts of Teams, as I understand it. And again, adds to this theme that without throwing your hands up or putting up the white flag and just saying it's impossible, it's I guess about trying to identify the areas of Microsoft 365 that are important to your organization and trying to focus on them would probably be my advice. And accept that you're going to miss things, even things. So something we had recognized at the beginning, one of the benefits of one of the drivers for using SharePoint was this ability to share externally, safely, securely. And we've only really realized recently that we've not really done a very good job of setting up that profile or the options that are available to us. So we're currently able to share, our staff are able to share information with very little control to almost anybody they want. So it's something we've missed, and we're only now getting back to. And it'd be easy to beat ourselves up about that, the things that we've not done right, or we've not done well. But actually, when you take a step back, there's a huge amount that we have done well and has improved the organization, both at a business level and from an information management level. So yeah, don't be scared to sit back and pat yourself on the back. I suppose it's not an easy job. Yeah, touched on retention. We're not going to go into a huge amount of detail on it at this point, largely because our Records 365 platform enables us to do. It's not even so much a lot more, but certainly in a different way than Microsoft's native tools. So neither Claire or I think it's fair to say, are experts in retention across Microsoft 365. So on that note, we'll just go on to some conclusions and lessons learned, and I suppose more thoughts. If that's okay with everybody, and that's okay with Claire. So
okay.
I was going to say, on you go, Claire.
I think for me, it's the first one on this slide, and I've got it in bold in my notes, and I don't think I can talk about it enough or stress it enough. It's culture change, and the importance of people in this journey. It doesn't matter how well, I think we've already kind of touched on it, but it doesn't matter how well you set up your system, what your build looks like. It could be the definition of perfect. But if you don't take your people with you, if you don't get your people invested in a new way of working and using new tools and open to change, then it's not going to work. And I think we've done a good job. I think we've done quite a lot of work in making sure that we've got lots of different types of training available. We've got our super users involved. We've been, in my opinion, the project has been very communicative with the organisation. We've hosted demos, drop-in sessions, all sorts of different types of communication. So I think we've done a lot and we've done really well. But I think we're still coming up against challenges, and I think that just shows how important it is to bring your people along with you. I think that would be probably my biggest lesson learned or conclusion or key point is that culture change is central. Without it, you're going to fail.
Have we lost Claire? I was
just thinking that. I don't know if we've maybe lost Ryan as well.
Yeah. I wanted to tell them, goodness, they have done so much considering the challenges that they have gone through, and I take my hat off to them for reaching this far. And okay, so Ryan Kerr has lost his internet connection. Okay, let me see if before we there they are.
Am I back? Am I back?
Yes, you are back. Ryan has lost his internet
Ryan's
connection.
Ryan's gone. Ryan has completely disappeared. I'm here. I'm back. I think. It tends to be around about 2:00. Our network gets really busy. I think it's everyone coming back after lunch. So apologies for that. I don't know how much. I don't know how much you heard before we dropped out, but basically my point is culture change is really important.
Yeah. We all thought you started crying because of remembering all the challenges.
It's so important. No, just my internet being playing up. I will let Ryan try and get back in, but Shona's gone as well now. I think everyone's disappearing. I'll keep going, and if I cut out again, then hopefully the screen will tell me. So culture change is really important. Some of the other lessons or conclusions that we've taken from the work that we've done so far, and I think it's important to stress again that we are nowhere near finished, is how you roll it out. I think the information management profession has been reactive, I guess. Historically, we react to changes after they've happened, and I think the way that HES has approached Microsoft 365 is a really good example of that. It's been rolled out piecemeal, and it's been rolled out in demand from business areas rather than being driven by information management and IT colleagues. And I think the key takeaway from that is that you've got to try and be one step ahead, not necessarily of the technology, because nobody can do that because it changes so quickly, but you've got to be one step ahead of your staff, not miles ahead, but just that one wee step, so that when they come to you demanding some sort of new technology, you know what it is, you've heard of it, you know what the information management implications are, as opposed to like what happened with me in Teams. Someone asked me for Teams and I was like, I'm sorry, what's this? So yeah, just just trying to be a bit more proactive and a bit less reactive, I think. And that kind of lends itself to the next point, which is being flexible. Technology changes and develops so fast that you need to be open to changing. I think our approach to SharePoint has been quite prescriptive. We've got a set structure and we're requesting that people use it in a certain way. But at the same time being sort of open to response from user feedback. But I think the way we've done certainly Teams and OneDrive, we're much more able to be flexible from a technology change point of view. That light touch governance gives us the ability to react to technology changing, or to, if we foresee technology going in a certain way, it allows us to kind of look back, and we don't have as much to unpick or to change as we potentially do if SharePoint is to change much. I think Ryan's back with us.
Yeah, seemed to be. No idea what happened there.
No,
Everything
I dropped
just
out
shut
as
down.
well. So I haven't put the slides back up, but it was just that one last one, so I don't think we necessarily need it. So yeah, I was just talking about the ability to be flexible, and I think linked to that is purposing. Making sure that it's something that Ryan touched on slightly earlier, is we as professionals need to understand what the tools are and what they can do. And once we understand that at a general level, we can then decide, well, how do we want to use it? How do we want our organisation to engage with these tools? And if we are clear on that, then we can encourage staff to use them that way without being overly prescriptive, I think it's fair to say. Yeah, if you're overly prescriptive, you end up with that sort of shadow IT. People just go away and find the tools. If you don't let them do what they need to do with the tools that you have, then they just go and find a tool that they can do it with. And that kind of increases your risk, and you end up with information in places that you don't necessarily want it, let alone know that it's there.
I think it's a good thing. I think possibly one is maybe a desire for control that's impossible to have, but I feel there's been arguably a lack of a plan, in the sense that we've got Microsoft or Office 365 as it was, and we've deployed bits of it piecemeal, and we've not really made clear to our staff what they have, what they can use, how they should use it. So you'll find there's Miro, for example, the whiteboard tool is used quite extensively in HES, and yet there's a whiteboard functionality with Microsoft 365. Now, it might not be enough for some teams, but it's probably going to be enough for a lot of what HES does, but we're potentially paying more money for that almost competing software. So I think there's an element of maybe we should or could have done that analysis of what the product has, what it can be used for, and what HES staff should use it for. But yeah, as yet and part of that's an IT thing as well as IG, but that bit of work hasn't really been done yet. So there's still a lot of competing technologies being bought and used. I don't know if we talked, because it kind of links into that idea of the profession more generally being quite reactive.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you mentioned that while I was away, but I think cool. That need to be one step ahead of staff.
Yeah. I think the last point on the slide was focus. Yeah,
so I think we've probably made this quite clear throughout the presentation that, in my mind anyway, we couldn't roll out OneDrive, Teams and SharePoint effectively all at the same time. We don't have the resource. Bits of the business would be even more confused than they potentially already are. And my instinct anyway, and people are welcome to disagree with me, but my instinct is, if we do SharePoint well and do that right, and we've put light touch controls or governance around the other products, we're starting from a good base and we can improve, and we've given the due attention, or the attention that, in my opinion, SharePoint needs, given again how complex it all is. And it's a new technology for all of us in IG. hopefully we'll be able to do that justice before moving on and looking a little bit wider. So again, apologies for that dropping out the lessons learned bit, which might well have been the most important bit for some people. But I hope you found that very useful. And if there's no objections, we can probably have a look at some of the questions.
Yeah. I was going to say, while you're looking through the questions that you could answer, thank you so much, and thank you for revealing a lot of the struggles you've had. You have done really well considering the challenges that you've had, the enormous challenges that you have, which is quite normal. I'm sure a lot of the guys that we have here are going through the same. And I have seen that in all of these events that we have tried to put together in Scotland, because it's not just the vendors who give us this beautiful picture of what's possible. That is a learning event for us. These knowledge shares are important because we get to learn what is actually happening, when people are implementing things, not this picture perfect of an ideal thing on that. And this is, I think this is the reason why I was adamant to create this new group in IRMS. It's not to make all of you IT people, but it's more to do with, I want you to have an avenue to keep yourself up to date with the technologies, not just Microsoft, because Microsoft is not the only brand that we're dealing with in terms of information management. There's a tons of stuff that we're dealing with, and hopefully that is something that you could help me with this new group as well, all of you, and so that I know what you need to be updated on. And the second thing is, in fairness to Microsoft, it's such a huge organization that you get into all sorts of people there. But we are very lucky with the cab that we got into the heart of it. The cab is actually straight into HQ, which is in Redmond in Seattle. And we got there, and we got Microsoft engineering in our hands. So what we'd like to encourage all of you is to give us that feedback of your pain. And then we feed that right through, because it is so rare for a professional group to have that. I mean, a lot of people are wanting to jump on the cab so that they can influence Microsoft. And we were saying, no, our users come first. This is really for information and records. We need to address those first. And we have that avenue because of the links we managed to get into Microsoft, especially with engineering. We have a really good thing with engineering there apart from that. So I will shut up now and and Shona the questions and all that stuff. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, we just start from the first question and work our way up.
Yeah.
So Renee had asked, how much time have we set aside for this project? So yeah, we've got a full-time project team. Let me get this right. So we've got a project manager, we've got 2 consultants working with us, and we've got 2 members of the IG team that spend pretty much 100% of their time on the project support officer, and a project lead. So we have a pretty well-resourced full-time team, and it's been, when did we start, Ryan? September 2019? No, 2019? I can't remember.
Yeah. So I think
time means nothing anymore.
It was broadly a 2-year project, and it is slowly but surely been extended. And I think it's probably a really useful learning or lesson learned is that, so we did a pilot with our finance department because we're part of that directorate, finance and performance directorate. So took the 2 core finance teams and information governance as our pilot, and we learned a lot in that, and a lot of those lessons can be applied right throughout the project, but equally a lot of them are very specific to those teams and that department. And continuously, I would say every single directorate and almost every single business area has thrown up its own little challenge or sometimes major challenge. I think the migration and getting information into a state to be able to effectively move it into to SharePoint has proven a challenge to some teams, a bigger challenge to some than others, and that has resulted in some delays. I think a large part of that's probably down to COVID and the restrictions in place there. Although we've also made time savings around training with COVID because everything's done virtually, whereas previously we'd planned classroom-based learning for most of the organisation. So yeah, started with 2 years, probably going to be nearer 3, I think, is the simple answer to that, really.
Jennifer's asked a couple of questions. So do you use a record center or records in place? I'm assuming that's linked to Microsoft 365 retention, in which case we don't, we use Records 365. But yeah, Jennifer, you've also asked, it'd be helpful to know the life cycle management if possible. So I mentioned triggers, what role do the users have and how do records managers support? So at the moment, that bit's still being worked out, I guess. We've got the system in place and the rules are being built, so information is being classified with its relevant retention period, but that's about as far as we've got. We don't have that sort of business as usual process implemented yet. So at the moment, it's actually on my at the top of my to-do list, is to work out what roles users have, who's going to be involved in the process, what role do we play. So yeah, at the moment, I don't know is the simple answer, but yeah, if you've got any ideas, feel free to fire them our way.
No, I don't have any ideas, but it's something we're thinking of, because we have Objective EDRMS.
Mm-hmm.
And we're using Teams in replacement for Skype for meetings and communication, telephony only, or so I was told. But then I suddenly find when using it, you can upload documents to it. So yeah, it's one of the key issues that I have, well, we have as an organisation, and it sounds as though you have a very similar issue, is before the technology is actually implemented, knowing enough about the technology to actually be able to answer the questions appropriately. So a follow-on question for me would be, how did you, I know you were leading the SharePoint, but how do you make sure you get enough knowledge without having to become a technical Microsoft 365 expert? Are there any specific training courses, or how did you actually get enough knowledge to be able to make appropriate decisions?
I think I'll let Ryan take this one.
I'd say there's probably a couple of things. One is the finding the people in your organisation that do have the technical knowledge and just becoming good friends with them, and at least having the ability to sit down and say, these conversations always start the same way. One department wants something from the other, and they go, well, you got to tell me, what you mean, or what, and put it in some context. We'll have that with the external sharing in the coming days. So what are the buttons that we can switch on and off, and what do they do? What does that mean? And you just have those conversations and work your way through it as best you can. A lot of it is trying to make decisions. It feels like a bit off the cuff. And yeah, certainly Claire and I've had that panic in the past where you go, oh, what have we just done? That was an awfully big decision that we made over half an hour with a cup of tea.
And what I've also found is that the people who are trying to explain it to us, the technical people, don't understand the implications for themselves. So they're giving us only part of the picture, whereas perhaps we need a broader picture because there's implications for the decisions that we're making. So it sounds as though we're all in the same boat, but yeah. I'm really keen to, thank you very much. I'm sorry I've taken a bit of time here, but I really appreciate this, and really keen to make sure that we have continued conversations and learn from each other.
Absolutely.
So
that's what it's all about.
I think so. The one other thing I'd say is get some help, and whether that's in exactly as you've described, speaking in amongst this kind of group and with IRMS colleagues, or consultants, bringing them in and using their expertise.
Yeah. I actually think. Sorry, I just wanted to say that I was in the NRS call the other day. Was it yesterday, or it's been a long week, where they were having this conversation as well about them inputting into conversations with Microsoft as well. So just put that out there. And thank you again. I'll go now. Thank you.
No worries. I think that actually kind of touches on a question Joanne's left as well. Can anyone advise on the best place to get advice on starting from scratch with SharePoint? We recently got it, but none of us have used it or know much about it. And I think it's that same sort of speak to people, speak to colleagues in your own organisation, folk on IRMS that have done it before. I actually found, and it's probably not entirely relevant for starting from scratch, but I recently had to build a demo site for a team, and it gave me that sort of 2 days of building this demo site gave me more knowledge on how SharePoint works than the last 2 years of listening to project report updates and all that sort of stuff. I've very much been on the sort of theoretical side of things up until recently, so actually getting my hands dirty, that massively increased my knowledge of how it works. So I know we don't always have time to go sort of playing about with things, but yeah, if you get an opportunity to dive in, then yeah, I would use it. I see Melissa's also asked if we can share our guidance on Microsoft 365 tools and which to use. I don't see a problem with that.
Just have a look for it on our intranet.
You're just looking for it just
at
now.
least
Put it
bring
up
it
on the
up just
screen.
now. But certainly no issues with sharing it wider.
Yeah, I can do that. While you look for that, oh, actually, this is a question for you, Ryan. So Alison has asked, why did we decide to use Records 365 for retention? Well, it's specifically for retention in Teams rather than the functionality within Microsoft 365. So I don't know about why we chose Records 365 generally. That was before my time. But certainly for retention in Teams, I think it was a resourcing thing. We didn't have time to look at it properly, and our main concern was over corporate information being held in the files tab as opposed to content actually within the teams. So within is it conversations, it's called, the wall that you post on. We don't have the chat function turned on, so that wasn't an issue for us, and we have no sort of issues over the team sites themselves staying live. So that's probably why we chose to use Records 365 for Teams, is because it was specifically documentation that was being uploaded. But I don't know, Ryan, if you want to add anything about why we chose Records 365 in general.
In general, we had a consultant come in and advise us on effectively on how we should be managing our information post shared drives in line with PRSA compliance specifically, and wider information management or information legislation. And we also had a requirement to manage physical records, and they came back with the only third party, or we needed a third party tool because Microsoft 365 didn't have the required functionality, and the only one that did physical records as well was RecordPoint. So that's how we came to purchase RecordPoint. In terms of why we used that for Teams, it costs a fair amount of money, so we're going to use it as best we can, or as much as we can. So yeah, that's probably a slightly facetious answer, but not far from the truth as well. I haven't used the native functionality, but from what I've studied on it, Records 365 certainly gives us more functionality, but you'd expect that for the cost, but it appears to be quite a lot simpler to apply retention.
Cool. Did you find that? Have you got that guidance?
I do, yes.
Do you want to share your screen?
Share screen. So I don't know if people are able to see that. So this is our intranet, which is also on SharePoint. So we've got the document center as corporate storage, Teams as a collaboration, and OneDrive as our personal storage, and just a very simple, what is it, what's it for, and what's it not for. And then from there, we can go into, let's see how this works. I think it might be downloading something.
I was going to say, it obviously won't work because we're doing it live. That's not how these things.
Yeah, so I just want to open it, so see if this works or not. don't know why the one we would want to work most of the document center isn't going to anything. Always the way.
I will make a note to check that.
So yeah, this is, I don't know how easy that is to see. So yeah, use cases. I've created a presentation to be delivered to an external audience. Where should I save it? Should be saved in the document center. Check your business function site for the most appropriate place, for example, communications library or document set. So the idea there is to give people some specific examples of regular type of information that they will use or come across, and give them a steer for what's the most appropriate place. I think in theory, if they read through the 3 different platforms and read all of the use cases, it'll become fairly obvious fairly quickly where you should be saving any given document. But I appreciate that not everybody's going to take the time to read all of the material we've developed. As I say, seems to have gone down very well for those that have been looking for it, and those that are feeling overloaded feel like they're being even more overloaded by being shown this. But yeah, if anybody wants a version or a copy of it, I'm more than happy to share. And if there's a lot, we'll put it on IRMS. If I need to assume that's okay, but we should be able to do that.
So we've got a couple of other questions. So Emily's asked, I wonder if you've allowed access for external individuals to teams and if you have governance in place around this. So I don't think so. I'm not entirely sure. Ryan, do you know?
Sorry, I was being distracted by buttons.
If we've got external access, if we allowed access for external individuals to teams and if we've got governance around it.
My instinct is yes, we have allowed it, and no, we don't have governance around it, and that forms part of that wider. We recognise this was one of the benefits, one of the things that we were looking to formalise, I suppose, or put some governance around, and we haven't yet done so.
Okay, got there. Have you implemented or are you looking into implementing any other Microsoft 365 tools? Certainly we're not in information governance. I think Forms, I don't know about Sway, Forms is definitely being used across the organisation, but it's like, again, it's another piecemeal thing that's been picked up by individuals or individual teams. We certainly, in information governance, certainly don't have any sort of longer term plans to roll out bits of Microsoft 365, but that's not to say that IT don't. I don't know if you know any more.
I think it's that wider bit we touched on, that there's lots of functionality within Microsoft 365, and we haven't, in my opinion, done a good enough job yet of telling the organisation what is out there and what can be used, and what purpose Stream is versus Power BI or whatever. So yes, there's ideals, and there'll be certain teams are already using that technology. Stream's being used a bit more consistently by the organisation, but not in any structured way yet.
Fab. So the next question I think might be related to native retention within Microsoft 365. How many business terms do you have connected to retention, and how many retention types do you have? I think the closest that I can come to answering that is that our retention schedule has 400 and something lines on it. So we have 400 and something labels in Records 365 that get attached to documents. But that's probably about as close as I can come to answering that one. Melissa was asking about change management. How has the change management of this gone? How much work was done to educate users on the new way of working? So I think we've kind of touched on that already. But yeah, it's recognising how important it is, and that recognising that different people engage in different ways, and trying to provide as many different methods of communication and learning as we've been able to, as a way to try and manage that. And yeah, I think it's worked quite well.
I think we've done as much as we could have within the project. As I've said, there's and we've done it in various ways. So if you like learning by watching a video, that's available. If you want to speak to someone in person, you can go and do that. I think we've tried and been willing to go and try different things for different people in different departments to if that's what they've asked for and they think that will help. You talked about doing that demo, which was a lot of work for Claire to do that, and I found that people tend to do appreciate it, and they do engage a bit more if you give them what they're asking for in that sense, I suppose. That being said, we've got someone today we were discussing that is really almost aggressively against what we're trying to do, and not prepare, or people that aren't prepared to engage or aren't prepared to change anything, that this is just something that's been imposed on them, and they're not happy about it, and it almost is, regardless of how we approach it. I think that will always be their mindset. Doesn't mean we don't try and engage with them, but it's always going to be a challenge. I think it's also worth pointing out that they're calling it the Programme for Success, which is, or it's changed over the years, but it's broadly 7 major projects that almost all of them use either technology and or manage information in a slightly different way than has been done in the past. So there's a huge amount of change in the organisation, change overload without a shadow of a doubt in certain areas. But the flip side of that is that there's been not a big team, but there's been a small sort of program team that have been able to facilitate or help with change. So there's change champions across the organisation that were assigned to one of those 7 projects. So there, in the earlier months, there was a lot of high level presentations as to this is the kind of stuff that's going to be happening over the next couple of years. So not necessarily specific to our project, but just general change that's coming. So there was, I would say, quite a lot of prep in terms of these are the types of projects, and for some people that's not enough detail, others it's too much. And then probably more latterly, it's been more the specifics of dealing with teams as and when they migrate, and trying to support them as much as possible pre-migration, and without blowing our own trumpet too much, the post-migration, post-go-live support has been very widely praised, and down in large part to Claire and her team, willingness to go that extra mile and help people out. And in my experience, those that have engaged with us and felt that help and that support being there, they're the departments that have succeeded in making the change as smooth as possible.
Yeah. And then I think that's our last question. So it's from Christine. Claire, how far has COVID been a positive driver in the care providing and charitable sectors? COVID really changed people's attitude and use of the internet and Teams, etc. overnight. I think it's fair to say that work had started prior to COVID, but COVID definitely had an impact, because we went from an organisation that was largely office-based with some flexible home working to overnight being an entirely home working organisation, as did everybody else. But I think it's definitely been a driver in the use of Teams. I would say I think the requests that we've had for Team sites have increased exponentially over the last year.
I think
it's definitely had an impact.
It probably stems a lot from there was a lot of discussions around using or bring your own device, as it gets talked about in HES, and IG probably being a little bit of a barrier to that, in the sense that hindsight's wonderful, but previously we looked and go, well, why do you need to use your own device? We're giving you HES laptops, HES phones if you need it. But then overnight, a large swathe of our workforce that were still working couldn't access their information because it was on shared drives and they didn't have a HES device. So that really drove Teams use, that we allowed access to Teams. And yeah, I think overnight our approach to bring or use your own device changed, or was forced to change, I suppose. And we'll never put that genie back in the bottle, and probably shouldn't. But yeah, probably going off in a different topic, but BYOD's different things to different people. But at least people can now access Teams, well, Microsoft 365 from your own phone or laptop. And we'll deal with the security issues that come with that elsewhere.
Melissa's asked out of interest, how many Teams sites do we have? So I'm just trying to pull up the register. I don't actually know off the top of my head. I think it's over 100. I know that much, but I don't know exactly how many. And of course, my SharePoint isn't working. These things never work when you want them to.
I was going to see how many teams I'm part of.
Oh yeah, I don't even notice. Like you said, I don't check. If I get an email that someone's tagged me, I'll go and check. But
You need to have access to Teams admin. So if you just go to admin and then Teams,
oh no,
one click, you'll see everything.
Certainly
yeah.
remember 15 teams and seldom ever look at Teams at all, to be honest.
The organisation has 107 teams at the moment.
Mhm.
But yeah, as I say, it's our approach to Teams is very light touch.
But I think it's also good just thinking back to when Teams was being rolled out and or sorry, beginning to be used rather than rolled out. And I can think of 2 or 3 people that hated it one day, loved it the next, and loathed it a few weeks after that. So I don't know what that tells us about the technology, but I think it has the potential to be a bit Marmite for people.
Yeah. I think we're out of questions.
No, I have a question. It's very important. So, it seems to me that a lot of folks are in the same boat where they had to rapidly implement Teams because of COVID. After that, so now we're doing re-engineering, if you like. So we're like obviously reviewing what has happened and all that stuff. Have you, as an organization, thought of, well, we've got Teams. What do we actually use Teams for? Within the specter of information management technologies that you have in your shelf or your users have access to. Have you established what what is the use of Teams in your organization and define that?
For us, it's that we've called it collaboration, as I brought up on the our intranet. So it's what it is: a space for short-term collaboration, communication, and informal discussion with an enforced retention of 2 years. So it's not what's the word? It's not locking anything down very specifically, but it should give direction to staff as to what it is. And when you read it alongside OneDrive and Document Center guidance, hopefully it makes it clear. But what it might be used for long term, my instinct is Microsoft are going to push it more and more, and SharePoint will slide into the sort of background a little bit. So it could very well be that HES has to change its approach in the hopefully not short term, but certainly medium term future.
That's really good because that's much better than a lot of organizations that I have heard from or are still finding their way around it. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. There was one other question. I've answered it in text, but it was just asking how big HES is. So I guess just for a bit of context, we've got approximately 1,500 staff, but we can go up to about 1,800 in the summer, or usually in the summer when things are normal, with seasonal staff. And I don't know how many staffed sites we've got, but there's lots of them from Orkney to the borders.
I feel like it's about 80, but I could be massively underselling that.
I've said hundreds. I might have oversold it a little bit.
You might be right. I don't know. I should know, but I don't.
A large number of.
Yeah. And it's probably just for context, the information governance team, which is responsible for records management, data protection, freedom of information, and information security, is 11 staff at full complement, which we are for the first time in 2 years, which is nice.
Yeah. I think we're all out of questions now. So yeah, we have taken up more than enough of your time. So yeah, thank you all for getting so engaged and involved. It's always nice to get that little bit of feedback. It makes us feel like we're not just talking nonsense into the void. So yeah, thank you very much. And I guess just a reminder that this has been recorded and it will be popped on YouTube, so you'll be able to catch up afterwards. But yeah, thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And I'll replug the coffee morning or coffee afternoon. I think it'll be 1st of April possibly. But for IRMS members, please come along and say hello.
And don't forget to check the website for our upcoming events. Next Thursday, I think it is, she says cautiously.
Yeah, no, I think that it's at the 20.
It's on the website.
20-something, yes.
Is it James Lappin, I believe?
Yes, the one and only James Lappin. And if you've not seen him speak, please do come, because he's quite a thing, and his brain works in a very unique and a very fascinating way. I just find him the best thing ever, and he knows that too. I've told it to him to his face, so it's fine.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, fab. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Ryan, Claire. Oh, hold on, Shona, Claire, Ryan. How did you find all these new functionalities we've enabled? Sorry, the two Christines are still seeing you. I was just wondering.
I was going to say, I was just picking on people, inviting them to the stage. So. Which obviously people were welcome to ignore my invitations, but
no, it's nice to be able to see people sometimes. I think that's the thing with Livestorm, is that you don't necessarily see anyone, so you've got no reaction to what you're saying. So yeah, it's been nice to see some faces.
To see some faces.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll do this again.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll do this again for next week. I'll see you.
Fab.
Okay, so thank you so much. Take care. Have a good
Cheers.
afternoon.
Speak to you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.